How are countries in the EU responding to the war in Ukraine? Part 1. Starting with Austria. Austria's been somewhat lax compared to other EU countries. They're refusing to expel Russian envoys without proof of Vienna Convention violations, and they're also rejecting sanctions against Russian oil and gas. Belgium has been vocal in its support for Ukraine. They've been sending arms, welcoming refugees, and they're pledging to accelerate Ukraine's post-war integration into the EU. However, they still haven't stopped their very profitable diamond trade with Russia. Bulgaria has been struggling with its strong ties to Russia, with some calling Bulgaria Moscow's Trojan horse in the conflict. The new leader, Petkov, has been openly condemning the war and has already fired his foreign defense minister for suggesting that Bulgaria should not. However, public opinion is divided and it is causing controversy within the country. Follow for more. More countries in the EU responding to the war in Ukraine. Part 2. Croatia. Croatia has condemned the war and they're welcoming one of the highest volumes of refugees in the EU, despite early reactions to the conflict within the government being mixed. Early in March, a Russian drone also crashed into Croatia's capital, and Croatia was criticizing NATO for having a slow reaction to the risk. Cyprus. So despite initial apprehension as the war began to break out, the Republic of Cyprus has been accepting sanctions and accepting many refugees. Cyprus has a huge Russian population, and there is tension brewing between Cypriots, the Russian population, and the new Ukrainian refugees. Czech Republic. The Czech Republic has taken in a huge volume of an estimated 300,000 refugees, and they've also been quietly sending tanks to Ukraine as well as boosting their own military in response to the war. Follow for more. How are EU countries responding to the war in Ukraine? Part 3. Denmark. So in March, Denmark decided to hold a referendum to reconsider the opt-out clause that up until now has kept them out of EU common defense policy. This is a really surprising move, and it means that Denmark might be trying to take up more military responsibility going forward. Denmark has also been accepting high volumes of Ukrainian refugees. Estonia. Estonia has been taking in modest amounts of refugees and sending military aid. The country has a high volume of Russian-speaking residents, which stems from Soviet-era migrations. Many Estonians are concerned that the current conflict could spell the possibility of another Russian invasion of Estonia as well. Finland. Finland has had a historic shift in public opinion, so a majority of the population now supports joining NATO, which would have been unthinkable in previous years. Finland is also worried about another invasion from Russia, and they're highly dependent on Russian gas and oil, so sanctions are really expected to hit this economy hard. Follow for more. How are EU countries responding to the war in Ukraine? Part 4. France has been providing Ukraine with a lot of aid, mostly through channels in Poland. However, they are being fairly cagey about what military aid they are sending, possibly due to fear of Russian retaliation down the line. And with the election looming, Macron's quick approval of Russian sanctions seems to have worked in his favor, while his rival Le Pen has been scrutinized for her ties with Putin and previous policy on refugees. This being said, Macron is far from a guaranteed win. Germany. Germany has had one of the most surprising reactions to the war, especially considering their lukewarm reaction before it had officially broken out. Now, in response to the war, new Chancellor Olaf Scholz has committed to putting 2% of Germany's GDP into their military, putting it on track to be one of the strongest militaries in Europe. This is a huge shift from Germany's previous reluctance for military spending. In addition, Scholz has halted certification of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which was to pipe natural gas between Russia and Germany, and that's another unprecedented move. Greece. Greece was one of the first European nations to announce it would be sending arms to Ukraine, an announcement its citizens have reacted to with surprise. Greece is not accustomed to direct military interventions, and in addition, they have a history of cultural and political ties with Russia. Local public opinion shows low approval of the Greek government's intervention, with possible concerns for Greece's safety going forward. Follow for more. How are EU countries reacting to the war in Ukraine? Part 5. Hungary. Hungary's recent election of Prime Minister Orban has worried EU states, as Orban's history of strong ties with Russia could divide European policy. Orban has refused to send weapons into Ukraine or to allow other countries to transit weapons for Ukraine through Hungary. He's also the only EU leader who has openly criticized Ukrainian President Zelensky. Hungarian media and public opinion has been notably ambivalent about the war in Ukraine, although there are some 400,000 Ukrainian refugees in the country currently. Ireland. Ireland has been supplying some aid and is welcoming refugees, as well as being vocal in condemnation of the war. Public opinion has shifted towards closer support of joining NATO, but citizens are still not inclined to change Ireland's historical stance on military neutrality. Ireland is concerned about their food security as a result of surging fertilizer and fuel costs, as well as supply chain disruptions for grains caused by the war. Italy has been supporting sanctions and this week expelled 30 Russian diplomats. The country is more reliant on natural gas for energy than many of its European counterparts, so price hikes are already hitting hard. Policymakers are scrambling to shift fuel reliance to more natural sources. Follow for more. How are EU countries responding to the war in Ukraine? Part 6. Latvia. Latvia's close proximity to Russia, as well as its recent history as part of the Soviet bloc, has made it for an atmosphere of uncertainty, with citizens speculating that the small country could be up next for reinvasion. National Guard volunteering has risen, and like the other Baltic states, Latvia's imports of Russian gas have halted. Latvia is supplying a lot of the difference to the other Baltic states, with reserves of natural gas stored underground. Lithuania has declared a state of emergency. Public events or speech in favor of Russian military action have been strictly banned, as well as any information gathering on Lithuanian military or energy infrastructure. Like the other Baltic states, Lithuania is considered one of the most vulnerable parts of NATO right now and shares concerns about reinvasion. Luxembourg has had good diplomatic and economic ties with Russia for a while now, with strong bilateral trade between the countries. However, they have joined the EU in imposing sanctions and in deporting Russian envoys, as well as contributing a hefty 250 million euros in aid to Ukraine. Nonetheless, Prime Minister Patel spoke against fast-tracking Ukraine's entry to the EU, but he said the entry may be possible going forward. Follow for more. How are EU countries responding to the war in Ukraine? Part 7. Malta has had what seems like a reluctant response to the crisis. After much pushing, they have paused granting citizenship to Russians and Belarusians through their Golden Passport scheme, which grants foreigners EU citizenship for a hefty fee. Many of those granted Maltese citizenship in the past have been Russian oligarchs. However, they show no plans of stopping the scheme long-term, and the European Commission is proceeding with an infringement case. Although they are technically accepting Ukrainian refugees, Malta has also been back and forth about charging new arrivals for quarantine hotels. Netherlands. So the Dutch have been one of the most vocal EU member states against Ukraine joining the EU, and they did lead a coalition to block the move. They've cited respect for the EU's lengthy entry process, as well as worry that Putin may react with anger down the line. They have been freezing big chunks of Russian assets, as well as sending Ukraine arms and aids. And together with Canada and the UK, they also announced an international Ukraine support group, which apparently aims to provide Ukraine support going forward. Poland. So Poland is having an I told you so moment after years of warning the EU about the growing threat of Russian invasion. They have had arguably the strongest and most unified response to the crisis, calling for the harshest sanctions and welcoming an astonishing 2 million plus Ukrainian refugees. After recent changes to the Polish court system, which are set to undermine judicial independence, Poland was on thin ice with the EU and facing fines from Brussels, as well as the freezing of their pandemic recovery fund. Now it's possible that in light of recent events, Poland may have a case for unfreezing those funds, especially as the weight of supporting new refugees begins to take its toll. Follow for more. How are countries in the EU reacting to the war in Ukraine? Part 8. Portugal. Portugal has been supplying arms and troops, and public opinion appears to be in strong support of Ukraine. Portugal has also set up many programs to welcome refugees. Although Portugal doesn't trade much with Ukraine or Russia, the economy is set to suffer heavily if the conflict and higher European cost of living bring down tourism. Romania. So next to Poland, Romania has welcomed the most Ukrainian refugees, more than 690,000, to the surprise of many given their hostile stance on refugees in the past and their past of disputes with Ukraine. In addition to providing safe haven, they've taken on a more active role through military activities supporting Kiev and NATO troops. Romania has been hit with an influx of Russian cyber attacks, and many in the country are worried that the conflict could escalate. Slovakia. So Slovakia has caused a stir by giving Ukraine their Russian-made S-300 air defense system as part of donations to bolster their military. They've cut down on Russian media inside the country, and pro-Russian sentiments have dropped steeply since the war began, with Slovakia in the past being known as one of the EU's most pro-Russian countries. Follow for more. How are countries in the EU reacting to the war in Ukraine? Part 9, last part. Slovenia. So Slovenia has been sending aid, and they also sent their PM, Janez Janša, to Kiev to meet Zelensky and show support despite the security risks. Janša has also been very vocal about supporting Ukraine's fast track into the EU. Slovenia is planning to send diplomats back into Ukraine to show support, a move they say other countries should follow suit on. Spain. So Spain's already deeply divided government coalition has been rattled by the crisis, with PM Pedro Sanchez's choice to send lethal weapons to aid Ukraine being heavily criticized by his left-wing coalition partner, Unidas Podemos. The parties have also been butting heads on Spain's relationship with NATO, with Unidas Podemos being criticized for possibly jeopardizing their relationship. Like most of the EU, Spain's economy is set to be heavily impacted by the war. Sweden. So for the first time since World War II, Sweden has sent weapons to a country at war, Ukraine. Within the country, opinions are very divided on whether or not Sweden should also make a bid to join NATO. Despite current events making the move seem more plausible, many Swedes are attached to the idea of Sweden's safety as a neutral country. Follow for more.